Awesome. Okay, so look, I'll hand over now to Simon Walters from AUT. Many of you will know Simon. For those of you who don't, I think he's probably the most connected academic that I know of in the sector. He does a huge amount of work around sport development, actually speaks a very practical language, which makes a huge difference. And he's partnered in many initiatives over the stage, but over the years. But most recently, cricket has partnered with AUT over this concept of biobanding, which I must admit, when I first heard about it, I sort of thought, oh no, that sounds dreadful. And then the more I've listened to it and the more I've understood how they're exploring it and looking at how it might be used, the more interested I've become. And so I think I won't say anything more because they're going to tell you all about it. But it's a really interesting concept and also a really interesting way of looking how you can test things and pilot them effectively. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Simon and Richard.
Hey, thank you, Andrew, and kia ora. Yeah, I like the bit about the practical language. As academics, we tend to get lost in jargon. And hopefully, at the end of this session, everybody will understand what biobanding is and the implications it has for their sports in New Zealand. Basically, we've been working with New Zealand Cricket, and they approached us a number of years ago, suggesting that they had a problem in relation to the players that were coming through to the elite level. And they felt that the players coming through to them at an elite level in their late teens were overrepresentative of what we would call early maturers. So these are the kids that really mature earlier than anybody else. They're bigger, stronger, faster. And if you're playing a sort of physical sport, they tend to excel and stand out. So to start off the project, we measured the maturation status of players playing in their national under-19 men's team and also players attending their national tournament made up of representative teams. And in the next slide, we've got a graph which represents each of those players in relation to maturation. The blue dots there represent a player, and the single red dash at the bottom represents people who are maturing what we would call on time. The red dashes up above represent players who have matured early. So as you can see in this sample of cricket players drawn from a national team and national representative tournament, every single player is above the solid red line. That means they're either early maturers or they're trending towards being early maturers. To compare, if you did this graph on a sample of the population that was taken just randomly across the population, you'd expect to see below the red line people represented down to -1, and then a further red dash line to indicate who are the late maturers. In the cricket sample, we didn't need to show that graph because the entire population was above the red line. So they're either early maturers or they're trending towards early maturity. Now, what that means in relation to the population is that on average, 17% of people mature early, 17% of people mature late, and the remaining 66% mature on time. In a cricket sample, we've got them all either maturing early or trending towards maturing early. So to explain this concept of maturation and biobanding better, we came across a US soccer video, and apologize to any Americans in the room. It's quite an Americanized version, but Andrew Tara from Cricket has told me that New Zealand Cricket are working on a Kiwi version, which will come up with some information soon. So to start us off, Hamish is going to play this little US soccer video, which I think really explains well the concept that we're going to discuss a bit further today.
Meet Gabriella and Tyler. They're both 13 years old and have matured early for their age. They're taller, stronger, and faster compared to their teammates on their local soccer team. This is Diego and Mia. They're also 13 years old and will mature later than their teammates. Right now, they're smaller, weaker, and slower. Since Gabriella and Tyler have matured early, it's easier for them to place more emphasis on their physical attributes and less on their technical ability. At the same time, Diego and Mia are just as skilled, but because they haven't matured as quickly, they struggle to keep up with the speed or physical nature of the game. Children grow and mature at different rates. That's just how it works, right? There's nothing you can do to change that. What's the big deal? In sports like soccer, the difference in maturity at a young age can create a false impression for coaches who often perceive players who mature early to be more talented. The players that mature later might be more technically gifted, but aren't able to show this at the time. That's a problem. In order to improve the overall quality of soccer in the US, it's important for coaches to have the tools to identify and cultivate the best players, not just the ones who mature the fastest. In fact, extensive research has shown that advanced physical attributes observed in youth athletes are poor predictors of success at the adult level. This means that there could be a budding national team or pro player that goes unnoticed just because she or he is a late maturing athlete. This is where biobanding comes in. Biobanding is an effective and accurate method of assessing all young athletes' growth and maturation status. So, how does it work? Biobanding is the process of grouping players based on attributes associated with growth and maturation, rather than chronological age. It's not about playing everyone who is the same height or grouping players by how much they weigh. Rather, with some simple measurements, a bit of research, and using mathematical calculations, it's possible to predict a child's future adult height and the percentage they are from reaching their future stature. By having the growth and maturation information for all players within the chronological age groups, it's then possible to bring players of similar maturity from different age groups to play together. By grouping players this way, coaches can create an optimal environment where both early and late maturing athletes can thrive while supporting them to better identify talent. This creates new challenges for early maturing players who are biobanded with those with similar physical attributes, which encourages them to use and develop their technical and tactical skills. Late maturing players have a greater opportunity to perform in an environment without being suppressed by a lack of physicality, which helps them reach their fullest potential too. Coaches are also able to evaluate a player in a fairer environment, allowing them to judge the player on their overall potential without being biased by their maturity level. This sounds great. Why not bioband every training session and match then? Biobanding is a useful additional tool for player development, identification, and retention, but it shouldn't be thought of as a straight swap for the chronological age group system. Like most things, variety and different challenges are needed to provide the optimal daily environment for players to develop.
I like about that video, it's easy to understand, but what we're advocating for here is not something that replaces age group sport. It's adding diversity, and we'll talk a little bit about the cricket project and how we did that. So the question from cricket was, if we've got a bias, which we're seeing in our under 19 and under 17 age group boys, when does that begin? So phase one of our project, we measured 124 boys aged between 10 and 18 years. And again, bearing in mind that if you looked at the population, you'd expect to see 17% early, 66% on time, 17% late. Of the 124 male cricket players playing in winter training programs, there were 24% who were classed as early maturers and 76% on time, and 0 of those 124 were late maturers. And that's aged between 10 and 18. Phase two, we set up a 3-day camp, which is a skill development camp, and 58 boys were selected by their clubs to attend, and they were all aged 13 years. And in that camp, where we measured them, 43% were early maturers, 55% were on time, and only one of the boys was what we would classify as a late maturer. So what's been suggested here is that the boys, especially, and we'll talk about girls a little bit later on toward the end, we haven't done as much research, and neither has that been done internationally with girls. There's a big gap there, is that we've got a maturation bias in sport, and we would suggest we've got it in most sports across New Zealand and internationally. So to tell you a little bit more about the camp is Richard Pithy from New Zealand Cricket, and he'll talk a little bit more about what we actually did in the camp and what we found and the perspectives of the boys themselves and the coaches.
Thanks, Simon. Kia ora, everyone. Yeah, so we'll focus a little bit more on that phase two, which was the Auckland camp. So this phase two involved Auckland Cricket quite substantially, because it was their camp and it was a pilot to replace their under 13 representative tournament. And the camp was structured around skill-based activities and games in the mornings, and then some bio-banded T20 games in the afternoons. And we had Ian Renshaw, who many of you may know, but he's an expert in skill acquisition, and also specifically a skill-based learning and constraints-based learning. So he put together the games and activities. So they were all game-based with a focus on learning through constraints. So if we had a look at the first morning, the measurements, which is we conducted the measurements to band the boys into biological or teams based on their biological age. So if you have a look at that photograph there, that gives you an example of two of the teams. So the team on the right, so basically the bigger boys, that was team 1. So teams 1 to 4 were the early maturing boys, and teams 5 to 8 were the late maturing boys. So team 8 there on the left hand side is the late maturing boys, and you can see quite a substantial difference. So considering that they're all 13 years old and competing with and against each other. So in the bio-banding tournament, what really happened was that the smaller boys, the later maturing boys, all played against each other, and the early maturing boys and the teams and those teams played against each other. Now, if you have a look at the later maturing boys on the left-hand side, the boy with the blonde hair who's fourth from the left, so he's the late maturer. And if you look at him, he's probably, if you drew a line from the top of his head across to the biggest boy, he's probably reaches his shoulder, whereas that late maturing boy his predicted adult height is 187 meters. So he's probably going to end up being a lot taller than those other boys. So, but it just goes to show that at this stage he's not, and the challenge that he might experience facing bigger boys is maybe sometimes a little bit greater at this age, whereas when he was playing against peers that were roughly the same size as him, it was a lot more competitive and a lot more came out of those games. So just the other thing is that the late maturing boy was 80% of his predicted adult height. So that's, if you equate that to the video you've just seen, it indicates that he's in that late maturing band. If you can move on there, Hamish. So from a New Zealand cricket point of view, our insights were, we were interested in kind of the skill side of the game and maybe what the games looked like, and depending on which bio-band and which pool they were in. So things that we noticed, so teams 1 to 4, so again they were the more mature players. They could throw further. They could bowl faster. There was more of an even distribution between pace and spin bowlers. When they batted, they could hit balls straight. So in cricket terms, we would call that the V. So basically, they could hit the ball straight, both aerially and on the ground. So the reasons for them being able to do that was their greater strength, longer levers, stronger shoulders, stronger arms, those sort of things. And also from a fast bowling point of view, the quickest bowler was also in that group, in that team 1. So he bowled at about just over 100 kilometers an hour. So and certainly from a throwing point of view as well, we measured the distance that they could throw, and the furthest throw was 57 meters. So if you consider that at that age, their boundaries are anywhere between 40 and 45 meters. So those more mature boys can easily throw the ball in from the boundary. Whereas if we go on to the least mature players, so teams 5 to 8, their throw distance was a lot shorter. So in the shortest throwing distance was 24 meters. So that'll give you an indication that a late maturing boy, he's going to battle to throw the ball in from the boundary. They often tended to bowl spin, and the pace bowlers were slower. So the quickest pace bowler in the later maturing group was 87 kilometers an hour. And funny enough, in that group, in the photo we've just seen, so team 8, the majority of those players were spin bowlers. So we hypothesized that because they don't have the strength and the size to be able to bowl quickly, they need to find a point of difference. So their point of difference is spin bowling. So that's kind of what we felt was the reason for it, but obviously that needs a little bit more study. And also in terms of where they played their shots, so they tended to score most of their runs square of the wicket, and the reason is they can use their full body in that shot. So because they don't have the strength in the arms and shoulders, they need to use the full body in order to hit the ball, to hit boundaries. And the other area, which I haven't mentioned in here, but was a deflection. So they'd often use the pace of the ball to deflect it kind of backward or square. So again, a deflection just requires the use of the pace of the ball, not any strength. So yeah, if you can move on. Okay, I'll just hand you over to Simon. He'll just speak about some of the insights from interviews that were taken at the camp.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So if we want to align this back to the balance is better philosophy, which is why we're here today. So, it clearly states that, from a Sport New Zealand, when they came out this and signed the agreement with the 5 NSOs, it's about encouraging participation at all levels of the sport and developing skill at the right pace. So what we're seeing here, it's really, really important that young people enjoy the game and that they develop skill at the right pace for them. So what we're seeing in cricket, and it's been duplicated in other sports around the world, particularly in football, is that we'll specialize kids in positions based on their physical attributes as opposed to their potential and potential in relation to skill. And they're also developing different skills. So in relation to cricket, they're using their power to hit the ball harder, hit the ball further, and not playing the skillful shots. Whereas the smaller boys are working a little bit harder and playing skillful shots. So exactly the same age, they're developing different skills, which will enable them potentially, to drop out of sport. If they get to a certain age and they can no longer dominate physically, then the time has come. They haven't developed the other skills that are really important in their sport. What's going to happen to them and their sense of competence? It was really, really important to us that the kids enjoyed the camp. Because again, going back to that participation thing, the balance is better. We know that kids drop out of sport because they don't enjoy it. So did they enjoy it? And they did. We interviewed them, and the things they said, the smaller kids, the quote at the top, you can read that. But basically, fun to them was not being scared, not being intimidated, and just playing the game. So that was a strong aspect for them. One of the kids said that it was the first time he'd played cricket and he hadn't felt intimidated, and he really enjoyed the experience. A number of parents came up to us at the end of the day, and I think they were parents from what tended to be the smaller kids, to say that they'd really, really enjoyed the camp. And this is the first time that their kid felt as though they could fully participate, completely and safely. So what do the bigger boys say? And the second quote is representative of a bigger boy. What the bigger boy said was they enjoyed the challenge. So we know that challenge is an exciting part of sport, and it's what makes what we enjoy about it. It adds to that competitive element. So we're not really talking about winning at all costs here. We're talking about the thrill of the game and the excitement of it. And actually playing against boys with the same size as them meant they had to work harder and develop their skills. So just to close the quote there, it's definitely more challenging this week, and it's a good challenge. So the bigger boys liked it. They enjoyed it because it was challenging them to focus more on their skills. And the little boys fundamentally enjoyed it because they were playing with people of the same size. They didn't feel intimidated. So if we can move on to the next slide, Hamish, it was also important to see what the coaches thought about it. And there were 7 coaches there. It was a new experience for them as well. And basically, they reinforced what the kids said. So it was about enjoyment. The first one is talking a little about enjoyment, but some are a little bit scared facing taller boys, which they've seen before, even though they're in the same age group. So they felt it was a key development going forward. The second one, again, goes back to that developing skill at the right pace theme from Balance is Better. This sort of cricket rewards better technique. So you've got the kids out there trying to focus on technique and actually get better as opposed to winning the game. And what some of the coaches also said to us is that, you know, if it had been a representative tournament, you might turn up and you'd be out first ball and that's it, game over for that game. Whereas this, the way the games are structured, they faced, it was 25 and out, so they had a good time to spend on their batting. It wasn't that pressure of being out first ball. But again, it's important to acknowledge that this type of camp shouldn't replace what's happening chronologically, because going back to the photo that Richard showed, you know, the big lads were really tall, but they're still the same age as the little lads there. So, you know, psychologically and emotionally, they're at the same age pretty much. Okay, it's just physically where they differ. What are the potential for this? What's been done overseas is that if you actually banded players together, let's say, for example, of 13, 14 and 15-year-olds in a camp setting, you could have an early mature 13-year-old playing with a late mature 15-year-old at the same physical maturity level, okay, which is great for the skill development and the enjoyment of that camp. And you could also have the early maturers of the 15-year-olds being stretched even further with late maturers from older age groups. So we see it as a win-all, but not as a replacement for what's happening in the chronological age. And I alluded to the fact earlier on that there's not enough research done with girls. One of the problems we faced with girls' camp, and might add to this, well, there were only 20 plus girls turned up to the camp on the North Shore. The girls didn't want to get measured. They didn't want to get weighed. So we were unable to get a representative sample of the girls that were there, whereas the boys were looking at it as a bit of a competition. Oh, yeah, how much did you weigh? I thought I was 2 kg heavier than that, and giggling about it and laughing. So there's a lot more scope for work to be done. What excites us is that cricket have taken this on. They're looking at innovative strategies to try and enhance the participation of young people playing sport. I saw recently North Harbour Rugby coming out with some announcements as well, which were really innovative, making changes to their game. So I suppose the purpose of this, and I think why Andrew and the Sport New Zealand people have asked us to come along, is to give you an idea of what one sport have tried and show the scope for what we can do with other sports. Before we go for questions, Richard, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, just concur with you there, Simon. With the girls, we did find that so we had about 26 girls at the camp, and their parents are required to give consent to have their daughters, and in the boys' case, the boys' camp, the sons measured for height and weight. So a number of parents weren't prepared to do that, and that was fine. There's no pressure on them to do that. But what we noticed with the girls was that then other girls who were friends were then kind of felt a bit of peer pressure, and then they refused to get measured. So the result of that was that we probably only, well, about 20% of the girls didn't get measured. So we had to do some kind of guesswork as when we placed them into teams. So globally, there's not a lot of research into maturation of girls, so there's definitely potential for more there. And then also probably just need to add to what Simon said is that so following the camp from last year, we took some learnings from that, and some of the feedback from coaches was that they felt the games could be, the T20 games in the afternoon could be modified a little bit to include some of the learnings from the morning's games and activities. So, for example, we introduced max zones into the games for the first 2 rounds, and so that aligned to some of the activities in the morning where they were learning to hit the ball again in the V, so hit the ball straight on the ground and aerially, but also they were learning to play the pull shot, which is the hitting it square, and some of them the cut shot as well. So what we did is introduced max zones where they got double the number of runs if they hit it into those zones. So what we done, and then there were a couple of other modifications that came in as well throughout the 3 days. So we did notice that definitely had an impact, and it reinforced some of the learnings from the the constraints-led activities they had in the morning. But that's, yeah, so there's probably potential to investigate that a lot more and even focus a bit on some bowling areas and that. So yeah, I think that's all from us. It's probably question time, unless you've got something to add, Simon.
No, happy to answer questions, Hamish.
Cool. A few questions are coming through now. One from Daniel Cook. Is mental maturity taken into consideration?
In the work done by Sean Cumming in the UK, he's worked with Premier League. This is one of the problems with some of the research that's been done. It's usually with elite pathway only. We think there's scope for participation pathways as well, down at the grassroots level. But the reason that they don't replace chronological age sport with biobanding is exactly because of that. There's a psychosocial maturation there that comes into play. And I think I was mentioning this to you before, Hamish, like if you've got a 13-year-old kid, you're not really going to want them engaging all season in banter with a 16-year-old. You know, there's different levels of maturation and the way they communicate with each other. So I think it's something that you do in a controlled environment like we did with a 3-day development camp. And it offers some innovative alternatives to the weekly chronological age sport that they experience. Yeah.
I think there's a good tangent just there to Dave's question, and I'll loop back to some of the others. So in the club and school space, a main motivator is playing with your mates. Where does this fit in this model?
Yeah, again, it's not replacing. So keep them playing with their mates. These are the sort of things you could do in a development camp, which in the case of cricket replaced a representative tournament. So again, it's important that kids play with their mates. A big factor of enjoyment. Yeah.
Can I just add in something there? Is that we've kind of thought about it and don't feel that it'll replace club cricket and the chronological age at club cricket. We feel, just to re-emphasise Simon's point, is that it fits more into a replacement for representative tournaments.
Cool. There's a question here, and you might have already talked to this. Could you, in terms of banding, could you band together early maturers from the under 13s and then get them to play late maturers in the under 15s? And I guess probably maybe spoke to that logistically. Would that be something, Richard, that you guys might look to do in terms of skill development camps?
Yes. Yeah, so I think there's two opportunities there. Could be done in camps, absolutely, and possibly even when you're getting into the youth area, is you know, if there's tournaments run, they could be, instead of being under 14, 15, 16 or some such thing, it could be late on time and early maturing tournaments. So in that case, you could get a situation where you've got an early maturing 13-year-old with a later maturing 15-year-old. So I think there's a few opportunities, and there's potential to do more research, but also to try out things in that space.
Right. There's quite a few questions coming through now, so I'll just take two more. One that's just coming from Carla. How does ethnicity factor into the mix?
Yeah, great question, Carla. This is scope for New Zealand to lead the way in maturation at this sort of level, and not enough is known. Okay, so the calculations we use are based on population statistics. It would be really good to look at differences in ethnicity in relation to maturation. It'd be really good to look at differences in maturation in relation to girls and boys. So yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, I don't know the answer to it. Yeah. Cool.
And the last one, I'm going to try to tie two in together. So probably around the logistical considerations. Part A, I guess from Rebecca's question, could you get the banding just from taking the height or arm spans of girls and taking away the weight factor? And if not, what are some considerations, I guess even if they're early considerations, with how you could address the girls?
Do you want to answer that, Richard, or do you want me?
Yeah, look, probably from whether there's a calculation you can use just using arm span and height. I'm not sure. That's probably it's probably a research area, and the researchers would be the people to be able to respond about that. Yeah, look, I suppose what we tried to do was ensure that there were no males involved in the measuring at all. So even though I was there, I wasn't anywhere near where the measuring took place. So we tried to take away that aspect to it, and also all the coaches in the girls' camp were all female, and a number of them were current Hearts players. So we tried to remove that aspect to it, but yeah, it's a do one. I probably don't have any clear answers, but it might be something that we look at and see whether there's another way of gaining those measurements. I think the reason why we've gone with the height and weight was the Camus-Roche method, which is one of the most accurate ones, apart from actually X-raying their wrist and having a look at the growth plates. This was kind of the next best accurate unintrusive method, but maybe Simon can kind of mention that. But it is, yeah, the girls' space is an area that globally is not, there's not a lot of research, and there's potential there to do more. So it's a good suggestion, and it's probably something we need to look at further.
Guys, we're running out of time here. A lot of the other questions they're really good questions, particularly around some logistical considerations for applying biobanding. If your questions haven't been answered, I would encourage you to contact Richard and or Simon. Richard and Simon, are you happy if we share your email addresses? Yep. Okay. We'll call it there, and I'll hand it back over to Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Hamish. Thank you, Simon and Richard. Really, really fascinating, and great to see all those questions coming in from it. And I mean, to me, just reiterating some of those questions, to me, my initial reaction was a bit of concern over if it was meant to be replacing age group because of the whole social side. But the more I've learned about it, this idea of if we're going to replace representative tournaments with development camps, to be able to provide a different way of running development camps and innovation that allows better participation. It's an exciting new area to explore, and that's what we believe in. We believe in exploring and piloting and testing to try and find better ways to meet the complex world that we're in. So thanks, guys, and we look forward to seeing what's going to